The high-five habit sounds simple until you place it in the context of 2025. These days, we spend more minutes staring into cameras and screens than we ever do facing mirrors, and that shift changes how reflective rituals like this land. What makes this habit worth paying attention to is not superstition or feel-good slogans. Recent neuroscience and habit research show that small, deliberate gestures can trigger dopamine signals and strengthen new habit pathways. That means something as ordinary as a high five in the mirror can teach your brain a different way of responding to yourself. But here's the interesting part. If such a tiny act can create change, why does our same brain still spiral into panic over things as harmless as app notifications? Why ancient brains fail in a 2025 world? It turns out the tension comes from something deeper. Our brains were never built for the world we're living in now. What once kept humans alive in unstable environments is the same wiring that now sputters and short-circuits when it collides with constant digital signals. This mismatch explains why ordinary days in 2025 feel more exhausting than they should. If you rewind thousands of years, survival depended on a system tuned to overreact. A twig snapping might have meant danger. The faint gleam of eyes in the dark required immediate readiness. Your brain's alarm system was not designed to weigh whether the signal was a genuine threat or not. Better to overfire and live to see another day. Fast forward to the present, and those same alarms are still running, except instead of rustling leaves, the triggers are calendar alerts, message notifications, and the glowing red badges on phone screens. From your nervous system's perspective, a Slack ping is just as worthy of attention as a predator lurking outside the campsite. That's why the physical sensations feel real. When your body misreads harmless digital signals as danger, it unleashes fight or flight chemistry, elevated heart rate, tightened muscles, cortisol dump. These physiological reactions mirror what people describe as anxiety. The wiring isn't broken, it's simply ancient code running in an environment it was not designed for. And the data shows how widespread this is. About 40 million US adults, roughly the population of California, live with an anxiety disorder, according to the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. Surveys by the American Psychological Association show the scale of everyday strain, with 67% of Americans reporting they feel anxious about current events, 44% expressing worry about the impact of emerging technology, and 40% anxious about job security. These are not outliers, they're majorities or large minorities, reflecting how modern triggers bend biology into chronic states of edge. Viewed this way, the endless alerts people wrestle with every day stop looking like a failure of willpower. They're closer to a forced system overload. Imagine expecting a desktop computer from the late 1990s to flawlessly stream dozens of high-resolution videos at once. The screen would freeze, the processor would overheat, and nothing would run properly. That's how the human nervous system behaves when it processes inputs from texts, emails, threads, reminders, and online feeds all at the same time. The operating system still works, but it was built for fewer, slower demands. Anxiety today is often that crash showing up in the body: fatigue, irritability, lack of focus, or the feeling of being weighed down even when nothing dramatic has happened. This is also why people often catch themselves trapped in loops they didn't choose. You close your laptop meaning to take a break, but your hand reaches for your phone out of reflex. You plan just to check one update, only to find yourself scrolling a social feed without remembering how you got there. Researchers call this digital capture, the experience of attention being snared by systems that exploit your survival circuits. Once grabbed, the nervous system doesn't fully return to baseline, so sleep feels incomplete, rest feels fake, and the next day begins already on edge. The uncomfortable irony is that our ancestors had more freedom from signals than we do. If an area suddenly became unstable, early humans could relocate, at least temporarily. But you can't run away from the networks and platforms that stream into your pocket. Notifications follow you through the office, the commute, even your bed. The amygdala, the part of your brain tasked with scanning for threats, keeps spinning. Small vibrations, quiet tones, and subtle screen glows all get treated as cues to sound the alarm. And yet, it's crucial to point out what this does not mean. It doesn't mean you're weak for feeling anxious over modern triggers. It doesn't mean you're doing something wrong if you notice dread rising when tasks pile up on your phone. What's happening is simply an evolutionary feature firing in an unsuitable environment. The mistake most people make is blaming themselves, when in fact the hardware itself is mismatched. On top of constant signals, another drain is the number of decisions required each day. Do you check this notification or that one? Reply now or later? Click yes just to dismiss it or think through the choice properly. Even the tiniest of decisions demand resources from your brain's prefrontal cortex. Neuroscientists call the cost of this decision fatigue. A tribal ancestor might have had a handful of daily decisions: when to hunt, which path to take, who to travel with. In contrast, by breakfast you've already sorted through dozens of micro-choices, from inbox order to streaming menus to whether to respond on one platform or another. The accumulation drains energy reserves, leaving you convinced something is wrong with you personally when in reality, you're simply depleted by design using tools it never evolved to manage. Taken together, these factors explain why a work email can trigger tension in your neck, or why an unread message can raise your heartbeat. It's not a character flaw. It's biology running outdated code in a modern ecosystem of hyperconnectivity. Scan after scan shows how stress bleeds into physiology, even when the catalyst was nothing more than harmless digital noise. Recognizing this doesn't solve the overload on its own, but it does frame the problem differently. The problem isn't you, the problem is the conditions. And here's why that matters. Once you realize the issue is a system mismatch, you can stop beating yourself up for feeling overwhelmed and start experimenting with ways to ease your biology into the present. Small rituals that interrupt the cycle actually work because they exploit the very way your nervous system learns. They act like software patches on older hardware, simple adjustments that prevent unnecessary crashes. Which sets up the next question. If tiny actions really can reroute survival wiring, what's the simplest way to do that in everyday life? The 5-second rule, still relevant or dated? Back in 2008, Mel Robbins introduced what she called the 5-second rule. At face value, it sounded almost too basic to matter. Count backwards from 5, then act. That's all. And yet the idea spread quickly. People found themselves using it to push through hesitation, avoid spirals of overthinking, and take small steps they would have otherwise delayed. Fast forward to 2025, and our environment is radically different. Artificial intelligence recommends what emails you should read first, what songs you're likely to want, even what you'll add to your grocery cart. Digital platforms are designed to think faster than you, respond before you can, and keep you hooked until you lose track of time. Which raises an honest question. Does something as simple as counting down still have real power in a world where algorithms are engineered to capture every spare second of your attention? To answer that, it helps to go back to the original insight. The 5-second rule was never about the numbers themselves. It was about momentum. When you hesitate, even briefly, your survival wiring searches for a reason not to move. A phone call, speaking up in a meeting, starting exercise. The moment you pause, your brain conjures rational-sounding excuses to stay still. The countdown interrupts that stall. It breaks you out of autopilot and creates a gap to act before fear or inertia shuts you down. Simple, yes, but effective. Recent neuroscience helps explain why this works, though the details are more nuanced than blunt slogans suggest. Counting backward engages your decision-making circuits and interrupts automatic habit-driven loops. Scientists describe this as the balance between goal-directed control and stimulus-driven habits. In practical terms, when you count down, you're forcing your higher-order systems to regain control in the small window before your default patterns take over. That's why the act of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 feels energizing. It shifts your mental gears and reclaims choice. This mechanism has only become more relevant. Modern technologies multiply stalls and distractions. 30 minutes vanish doom-scrolling before you realize you never stood up. Streaming platforms remove friction to keep you in place. Next episodes load, videos auto-roll, feeds never end. By design, hesitation doesn't just prevent meaningful action anymore, it funnels you straight into compulsive loops. The new problem isn't only failing to act, but also being steered into acting without intention. Which is why the 5-second rule retains its power. It works differently now but still serves the same purpose, a reset button against automatic drift. Imagine you're about to click into another distracting tab when you should be finishing a task. Most people think, I'll just check quickly, but that thought rarely wins against the pull. The countdown, however, is physical and directive. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, close the tab. That micro-intervention converts reflex into choice. It doesn't need to be dramatic. Sometimes it's simply 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, stand up. Not to run a marathon, but just to take the starting step. The simplicity is what makes it usable. And while results can feel instant, there's realism to keep in mind about habits. Research shows new behaviors usually need at least 2 months of repetition before they stick. Reviews place the median habit formation process around 59 to 66 days, with wide variation from a few weeks to many months. So the 5-second rule isn't a shortcut to permanent change overnight. It's a lever you can pull repeatedly to practice acting on intention until that action becomes easier by default. Think of it as a training tool. Each countdown strengthens the neural pathway for self-directed behavior. There's evidence that pattern interrupts like this also help manage anxiety and procrastination. Many people say it gives them relief in moments of panic because it breaks the loop before worry compounds. Some clinicians even integrate it as a behavioral technique alongside established therapy and medication. But it's important not to overstate this. It is not a cure nor a replacement for treatment. What it provides is a practical tool for real-time regulation, a momentary shift back to control when your nervous system threatens to spiral. To understand the broader role in daily life, consider how much decision-making has been outsourced. Automated playlists, auto-sorted inboxes, targeted reminders. On the surface, these save time, but they also make the brain slower to initiate effortful choice. Decision fatigue creeps in sooner because fewer genuine decisions are left for us, and our default becomes letting external systems decide. By practicing countdown interventions, you're keeping your mental muscles for choice alive. Each time you use it, you reclaim a small act of authorship. Over time, that consistency builds confidence that you can interrupt distraction or avoidance whenever you choose. Take a small, everyday example. You're at home 2 p.m, still in pajamas, scrolling. You know putting on real clothes and stepping outside for a walk would help, but the whisper of inertia says, later. That's precisely the stall moment this rule is built to target. Count down and move, even if the first action is simply standing up. What matters is not the clothes or the walk, it's that you told your brain we act when everything else wanted to stay still. The brain remembers that shift and uses it more easily next time. Critics say the rule seems too basic for the complexity of today's challenges, but simplicity is often an answer, not a flaw. When everything in your environment is optimized to capture attention with speed and variety, the most useful tools may be those that cut through noise in seconds. A countdown sets a clear boundary your nervous system understands. It's just long enough to insert a conscious choice, but not long enough for doubt to build a case against you. If anything, the complexity of modern life is what makes blunt tools like this especially necessary. So yes, in 2025, the 5-second rule still works. The form hasn't changed, but its function has widened. In one direction, it can push you into action before hesitation grabs hold. In another, it helps you stop actions that systems try to automate for you. Think of it as a patch for an ancient operating system now trying to run on modern hardware. Your nervous system didn't evolve alongside smartphones and AI, but you can still train it to respond with deliberate choice. The countdown does not erase anxiety or end distraction forever. What it does is reintroduce freedom where it often feels absent. And that becomes increasingly important in light of a larger picture. Because beyond individual stalls and distractions, millions of people live with anxiety every day at a scale too large to ignore. Updated anxiety data, 40 million and counting. About 40 million adults in the US live with an anxiety disorder right now, roughly the population size of California. That number alone reframes the conversation. Anxiety isn't an edge case or a rare issue tucked away in clinics. It's one of the most common mental health struggles in the country. At this scale, almost everyone either deals with it directly or knows someone close who does. And yet, the experience often hides beneath the surface. You won't see a cast on someone's arm or visible stitches across a forehead. Instead, it shows up quietly, through sleepless nights, strained focus, or a nervous smile offered in place of what's really going on internally. When you step back and look at the scope, anxiety isn't fringe. It's a shared backdrop of daily life in 2025. Only around 1/3 to 2/5 of people with anxiety actually receive treatment. That leaves the majority navigating symptoms without professional support. It's not that effective treatments don't exist. Therapy, skills training, and medication can all bring relief. But access is uneven, stigma lingers, and delays in seeking help are common. So while the statistic reads 40 million adults, the lived reality for many is quiet endurance. Understanding what this number represents requires clarity on what anxiety actually is. For many, the word gets used casually. That text made me anxious, or my anxiety popped up again today. But at its core, anxiety is a survival system glitching in the wrong context. It is the body's alarm firing off when there's no direct danger near you. The human nervous system evolved to over-prepare, not under-prepare. That's why your ancestors could survive in environments where real threats were unpredictable. But those same circuits don't differentiate between an actual predator and a worrying thought about losing your job. The body still tenses, breathing shifts shallow, and heart rate climbs fast. The simplest way to picture it is like a car alarm that keeps misfiring. The alarm was designed to go off if a window is smashed, that makes sense. But when it blares whenever someone simply walks past, its signal loses reliability and creates more exhaustion than protection. Anxiety behaves the same way. It warns of threats that exist entirely in imagination. Picture running a scenario in your head of being reprimanded by your boss, or feeling dread because your child hasn't texted back yet. The nervous system reacts as though the crisis is already happening, flooding your body with stress chemicals before you have the chance to confirm whether it's real. In today's world, those triggers multiply. People imagine AI replacing their profession before they've seen any actual job cuts. A teenager panics when their message goes unanswered for minutes. Adults scroll through headlines about unstable economies, political division, or climate worries, and each update lands like a potential emergency. None of these moments involve a lion charging out of tall grass, but the body doesn't know that. It still launches fight or flight, and you feel it in your pulse, your gut, your breathing. Anxiety feels in the body because it is biology at work, even when the source is intangible. That's the contradiction of modern life. Measured by longevity, medicine, and reduced exposure to immediate threats, human beings are safer than ever. Yet anxiety levels are higher than at any other time on record. The explanation isn't weakness but mismatch, outdated wiring confronted with non-stop inputs. The human nervous system was never updated to handle 1,000 emails, notifications, and comparisons each day. So it activates protective physiology for the wrong reasons and keeps the alarm running long after it should shut off. The cost compounds invisibly, waking already tense, dreading normal tasks, pushing through days with a knot in the stomach, then trying to sleep as the mind replays an endless loop. When cortisol flows persistently, digestion slows, concentration scatters, and rest falls apart. Burnout isn't just about too much work, it's about too much time spent in a nervous system that won't let you switch gears. And because of stigma, people often blame themselves. They assume they're defective, when really, tens of millions are experiencing the exact same misfiring system. Daily routines illustrate how small triggers snowball. At work, your phone buzzes, and before you even open the message, a rush of adrenaline hits. Or consider the sting of scrolling through images of friends at milestones you haven't reached yet. Neuroscience shows why. Exclusion used to equal danger to life. In prehistoric tribes, being left out or rejected lowered survival odds. Now, digital comparison mimics that signal, telling your nervous system, status loss equals threat. To your body, whether the threat is a real exile or imagined inadequacy, the reaction is the same. Muscles tighten, stomach churns, focus narrows. This is the irony of hyperconnection. Every new input offers another chance for alarms to blare. Decades ago, an average person might have fielded a letter or call occasionally. Now dozens of pings, reminders, updates, and algorithmic prompts can pile up before the first meal of the day. Each carries a chance for the system to misinterpret routine data as danger. Over months and years, that constant readiness erodes resilience. Recognizing that pattern matters. Anxiety isn't evidence of weakness. It's one of the strongest proofs that ancient circuitry is running in an environment it wasn't designed for. And it explains why so many people are quietly carrying the same struggle. The alarm is universal. It just gets pulled too often by scenarios it was never meant to. Shifting perspective changes not just self-talk, but also possibility. Once people stop interpreting anxiety as a personal flaw, they can see it as a misalignment between body and context. That reframing makes room for curiosity. Instead of shame, the question becomes, what helps soothe the alarm when it rings unnecessarily? Awareness itself can make space for experimentation. People start noticing small practices that break cycles, brief interruptions, rituals that reset cues, movements that remind the body it's safe. Not as cures, but as practical ways of rerouting an overactive system. The fact that so many people share this fight also means approaches that work don't have to be complicated or hidden. They can be simple and consistent, woven into everyday moments. Sometimes the most powerful resets come not from elaborate routines, but from small symbolic gestures that send the survival system a different message. And those little signals land most during times when you're face to face with yourself, often in the space of ordinary daily rituals. That sets up an important turn, because while anxiety can feel invisible and consuming, there are everyday practices that operate on the same brain wiring fueling it. The question becomes, what happens when you take that wiring, designed to overfire, and redirect it towards something affirming? The high-five habit, more than a gesture. For many people, mornings start with a glance in the mirror that quickly turns into a critique. The instinct is to notice what's wrong, then escape to the phone for distraction or comparison. In that gap between self-disappointment and digital validation, the high-five habit inserts something small but disruptive. Instead of fueling the negative loop, you raise your hand, meet your own reflection, and make contact the way you would with someone you're rooting for. The effectiveness comes from the gesture's built-in meaning. High fives are rarely, if ever, associated with scolding or judgment. They signal encouragement, celebration, recognition, social glue that bonds teammates, friends, or even strangers in shared moments. This association runs so deep that your brain doesn't change the code when the gesture is directed at yourself. The nervous system still reads it as approval. Without needing words or arguments, the gesture communicates. You're supported, you're worth backing, you belong. Researchers who study behavior note that even small acts of self-acknowledgement can produce positive social, reward signals and mood boosts, responses that neuroscientists link to dopamine-related reward learning. Each repetition of a mirror high five builds an association between your reflection and encouragement, interrupting ingrained habits of criticism. Over time, the mirror shifts identity, less a place of flaw detection, more a cue for connection. This change doesn't arrive with fanfare, but with dozens of subtle repetitions that your brain wires together through practice. Unlike verbal affirmations, which often fail because the brain resists statements it doesn't believe, the high five sidesteps disbelief. Saying, "I love myself," can feel hollow if it clashes with your internal identity, but gestures carry meaning differently. They bypass language and hook into action-based recognition. Celebrating someone never requires a prepared speech. The gesture speaks for itself. Slapping that palm against the mirror may take seconds, but it carries an affirmation baked into the act, not dependent on whether you currently like yourself. That makes the practice feel accessible even when self-esteem is low. Morning mirrors, traditionally the most hostile space, become an opportunity to flip the script. Instead of spiraling into micro-judgments, skin texture, weight changes, under-eye circles, the ritual plants a contradictory signal. The system reads celebration, not fault. These subtle pattern breaks matter. Neural pathways strengthen based on repetition, so every time you attach support to your reflection, it becomes easier for your nervous system to expect support when you look again. Skeptics tend to get hung up on the silliness. Smacking your own reflection can feel childish at first, yet cultural rituals are filled with equally arbitrary acts, blowing out candles to make a wish, raising glasses to toast, clapping to congratulate. All are symbolic, physical gestures that our brains accept as meaningful. What feels awkward initially fades with practice, replaced by a quiet recognition, "I am on my own side." Framed this way, the mirror high five is far less odd than many rituals we perform without question. There is also evidence that observing actions and performing them recruit overlapping networks in the brain. This overlap helps explain why a gesture directed toward your reflection can feel reinforcing. In effect, the brain partially processes it as receiving support from another person, not only giving it. That dual effect, cheering and being cheered, amplifies the impact. Especially in a time when many describe feeling unseen despite constant online presence, the ritual functions as physical proof. You are visible to yourself, and that matters. The benefits extend beyond the few seconds in front of glass. When you start your day by pairing your image with affirmation, it influences how the next hours unfold. Self-criticism steers attention toward errors and shortcomings, while self-encouragement primes attention toward effort and possibility. That subtle tilt can change whether you take initiative on a project, speak more confidently, or resist an urge to avoid tasks. These small behavioral shifts are what accumulate into lasting change. Each high five becomes less about mood and more about identity. Someone who supports themselves acts differently than someone constantly fighting their own reflection. To make the habit easier to remember, pair it with an existing anchor. The simplest is brushing your teeth. 2 minutes at the mirror is already scripted into your day, so attach the high five immediately afterwards. This removes the activation energy barrier and prevents the ritual from slipping away once the day gets busy. By tacking the gesture onto a non-negotiable habit, you give your brain consistent cues. Every morning, without exception, acknowledgement comes first. Reports from community challenges built around the high five habit show patterns worth noting. People consistently mention improved mood and an easier ability to speak kindly toward themselves after weeks of repetition. Some describe reductions in harsh self-talk, others a small but cumulative lift in motivation. These results don't claim cure or replacement for therapy. Rather, they show what daily practice can shape, incremental upgrades to mindset that many find noticeable after consistent use. It's not a panacea, it is a micro-intervention that shifts the framework you build your day on. Critics sometimes dismiss this as placebo, but that critique overlooks how embodied rituals influence biology. Placebo effects themselves demonstrate how symbolic actions create real physiological outcomes. If repeated gestures lower stress chemistry or increase positive affect, then the distinction between just placebo and genuine becomes less relevant. All that matters is whether the action helps you live with more stability and momentum. Athletes tap their uniforms before competition. Performers carry charms during routines. Personal rituals have always been part of performance. This one just brings that ritual inward. Humor also works in the habit's favor. Gestures like this are intrinsically lighthearted. No one pairs a high five with a stream of insults. The dissonance would collapse the act. That's why the moment you celebrate yourself in the mirror, it becomes harder to maintain criticism in the same breath. The contradiction cracks the loop, leaving room for new narratives. Add humor to a ritual and stickiness follows. The brain likes to repeat what feels playful. What's most striking is how little effort it takes. Instead of strategies that require journals, specialized equipment, or hours of focus, this one asks for seconds, 2 or 3 moments daily to signal your nervous system in a new direction. Patterns of support overwrite patterns of criticism, not through speeches or declarations, but through repetition wrapped in action. Start awkward, continue consistently, and what once looked silly transforms into an anchor. A ritual like this highlights the overlooked principle. Real change often starts with physical action rather than abstract thought. You don't have to construct elaborate affirmations or master complex routines. You begin where the brain already understands, a simple celebratory gesture. Layered daily, it shifts identity one contact at a time, and this opens the door to a larger insight. While physical cues reshape inner states, the stories we tell ourselves about the future have their own traps. That leads directly to another tension worth addressing: why strategies like vision boards and future imagery so often leave people feeling further behind instead of closer to where they want to go. Why visualization often fails. Every January, people launch into aspirations armed with tools they believe will keep them on track. Notebooks, vision boards, and digital wallpapers fill up with dream homes, ideal bodies, or big milestones. For a short while, the images feel electric, but midway through the year, the same symbols often turn sour, serving less as motivation and more as silent reminders of distance between where you are and where you thought you'd be. This pattern repeats because of how the brain responds to visualization. Research shows that vividly imagining the end result can create reward-like satisfaction before any progress is made. Psychologists describe this as premature reward. The image sparks a small sense of completion, which feels encouraging at first, but it lowers the urgency to act in reality. Motivation slips away, leaving only a picture of goals still unmet. The disappointment grows when visible progress doesn't follow quickly. Instead of fueling action, the glossy images stand as symbols of what you haven't achieved. It becomes a mental gap, a reminder of lack rather than a path to momentum. Seeing an idealized body or a dream career on the wall day after day can feel less like a source of energy and more like judgment. Compare this to the evidence in habit research. Real change follows sustained repetition, not a single flash of inspiration. Studies indicate it takes on average 59 to 66 days of practice for a new behavior to feel automatic. Yet vision boards rarely remind people of the grind between day 1 and day 60. That's why simply filling space with finished outcomes often backfires. Brains don't need more fantasy, they need instruction. The stronger approach is process visualization. Rehearse the step-by-step reality instead of the glamorous end. Instead of picturing a completed novel, rehearse sitting down at the desk, fingers on the keyboard, deleting and rewriting drafts. Instead of imagining a marathon medal, picture yourself waking at dawn, tying laces, stepping into the cold, and moving even when you don't want to. Studies show visual rehearsal of sequences like these strengthens neural maps that support habit building. This primes the system so when you face the real moment, the action feels familiar instead of foreign. The contrast between these two forms of imagery is clear. Traditional visualization highlights the reward. It feels good for a short spark, but fades before behavior takes hold. Process visualization, by contrast, works as mental repetition. Athletes have long used this strategy, not by fantasizing about trophies, but by running through every practice movement in their minds. Controlled studies confirm that rehearsing the grind improves execution, primes persistence, and builds automaticity, the very mechanics that underlie lasting behavior change. Think of a runner training for a marathon. Imagining the finish line offers a brief emotional high, but doesn't prepare muscles or the nervous system for fatigue. Visualizing early mornings, heavy legs, and rain hitting the pavement does. A similar effect applies to any challenge. Musicians don't grow by picturing themselves at Carnegie Hall. They grow by mentally walking through scales and finger positions until their hands move on autopilot. This is rehearsal, not fantasy. And rehearsal is what aligns day-to-day experience with long-term goals. The culture of social media makes this even trickier. Feeds overflow with polished outcomes, book launches, vacation photos, fitness transformations. Rarely do we see the monotony behind them. When someone mirrors that filtered reality on a vision board, the brain learns to admire the finish line and ignore the process in between. That ignorance erodes persistence once effort feels messy. Process visualization pushes against this distortion by teaching the nervous system to expect effort, setbacks, and boredom along the way. When reality arrives, it feels normal, not discouraging. One concern people voice is that process-focused imagery seems less exciting. It lacks the glamour and feels tedious compared to glossy goals. But this isn't a weakness, it's its greatest strength. If sustained repetition is what wires new behaviors, then the practice your brain rehearses should feel ordinary. Excitement is not enough to carry someone through 60 days of repeated effort. Predictability does. By normalizing the grind in your mind first, you reduce shock and internal resistance when practicing it later. The practical application is simple. Anchor visualization to next steps rather than distant rewards. Replace the dream vacation picture with a photo of your sneakers by the door. Switch the luxury car image with a visual of tomorrow's budget app reminder. Habits grow fastest when paired with cues, and cue consistency, seeing the reminder daily at the moment of action, has been shown to shorten the time it takes for a behavior to stick. A vision board can still serve its purpose, but only if it functions less as a shrine to fantasy and more as an active playbook for behavior. Anyone can test this shift quickly. Instead of imagining a sudden surge of willpower, rehearse yourself resisting one impulse purchase. Instead of daydreaming about a perfect gym body, rehearse the act of rolling out of bed, changing clothes, and walking into the room where your workout gear already waits. Small imagined victories build mental maps of process, which your brain is equipped to replay when the real choice presents itself. Each rehearsal becomes one more layer of preparation. This reframing flips the role of visualization. It is not about convincing some outside force to deliver success. It is a strategy for convincing your own brain that the small, repetitive actions ahead are normal, safe, and repeatable. The marathon medal is just a symbol. The hours of practice are what make it possible. Every vivid rehearsal of those hours wires you for persistence, little by little, until the steps themselves become second nature. And that's where its real power lives, not in fantasy but in training. By swapping outcome-only imagery for process cues, you lay track for lasting change. A wall of perfect pictures loses meaning over time, but a wall of anchors, realistic steps, scheduled cues, ordinary reminders, works as daily rehearsal. Vision stops being decoration and instead becomes instruction. When practiced this way, visualization transforms from something that lets you down into something that reinforces steady effort. It keeps you grounded in what needs to happen today, tomorrow, and 60 days from now, minimizing the cycle of early highs and later disappointment. It's a tool for persistence in ordinary life, not a promise of sudden transformation. Seen against this backdrop, the question becomes not whether visualization works, but whether we're asking it to serve the right purpose. When grounded in process, it offers structure, calm, and the ability to keep moving despite uncertainty. And in the years ahead, that will matter, not just for personal habits, but also for how we withstand a culture where boundaries between effort and reward blur more than ever. Remote work, isolation, and mental health. Remote work exposed a different layer of stress that doesn't show up in productivity charts, but lives in the daily rhythm of people's lives. What first seemed like liberation from commutes and rigid schedules has, for many, turned into a blur of roles with no clean edge between them. The bedroom doubles as a meeting space, the kitchen counter becomes a desk, and the day feels like one long, unbroken shift. Organizational surveys and industry research show that a majority of remote workers report precisely this kind of boundary erosion. The relief of home comfort has, in many cases, been replaced by the unease of never really shutting off. When work was anchored to a building, the act of leaving gave your nervous system closure. Even a bad job allowed you to walk out the door and separate yourself from the workplace. Remote work dismantled that line. The office is now wherever your laptop is. Emails sneak into family dinners, Slack notifications pop up at midnight, and a flexible schedule often means being available at all times. At first it sounded like freedom, but constant accessibility is different from control. For many, it functions like a leash, always within reach, never granting full relief. Video calls add another load on top of that. Researchers now use the term Zoom fatigue for a reason. Sustained attention to small faces on screens, managing the awkward silences of delays, and constantly seeing your own reflection all increase cognitive load. You're performing while monitoring yourself, a dual attention task that drains emotional resources faster than in-person interaction ever did. Psychology and screen time studies point out how prolonged virtual meetings amplify exhaustion in ways people didn't anticipate. The result is not only physical tiredness, but a steady erosion of focus and patience throughout the day. Slack and other chat tools fragment attention further. Each ping demands immediate consideration, constantly shoving your brain into alert status. Instead of working in blocks of concentration, your day gets diced into slivers by dozens of micro-interruptions. It's not just an efficiency problem, it's a biological one. Every alert carries the potential of being urgent, and your nervous system reacts as if each deserves a mini fight or flight response. Over time, this non-stop signaling drives chronic tension, a body kept on alert with no cooldown. Humans are wired to need boundaries, visible cues that mark openings and closings. Rituals signal safety, The change of clothes at the end of the day, the commute that creates separation, the see you tomorrow exchanged on the way out of an office. Remove those cues and your nervous system never quite shifts. Remote work stripped away many of these transitions. For millions, the end of the day is no longer leaving a workplace but swiveling from one screen to another. The body interprets that lack of closure as unfinished business, and anxiety becomes the background hum. Isolation compounds the blur. At first it seemed appealing, no politics, no interruptions, no draining meetings. But over time, the absence of hallway conversations and shared lunches revealed what those micro-interactions really provided. They punctuated stress, gave a sense of belonging, and reminded people they weren't working alone. Virtual substitutes patch a technical gap, but not a human one. Many came to realize that being connected online isn't the same as feeling less alone. It sometimes underlines the distance even more starkly. At home, the office chair itself often becomes a stand-in for presence. Workers joke it's their therapist, bearing witness to monologues, frustrations, and pep talks whispered into empty rooms. What's happening underneath the humor is clear. Without people around, everything, objects, furniture, spaces, absorbs roles they were never meant to carry. The environment mirrors the mind's ambiguity, reinforcing the sense of blurred boundaries. This is where micro-rituals make a real difference. Tools like the 5-second rule can be reframed for remote work. Imagine finishing your final email and counting down, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, then standing up, closing the laptop and stepping into a different room. That small act interrupts inertia. The high-five habit joins in too. In a setting where no colleague will nod or congratulate you at day's end, a mirror-based high-five supplies affirmation your environment withholds. These gestures aren't superficial. They build the closure cues that your biology is missing. Studies of remote workers show that when people construct even tiny rituals, closing a laptop in another room, changing clothes, or walking outside for 10 minutes, they report lower stress and stronger focus. The common thread is closure. Without a commute or office chatter to carve the line between roles, the brain needs replacement signals. Mel's strategies act as anchors right where those cues are absent. They don't require grand routines, just repeatable markers. A simple integration could look like this. At the end of your last meeting, you count down, stand up, give yourself a mirror high five, and change into non-work clothes. The sequence works on multiple levels. The countdown signals transition to action. The high five inserts affirmation into solitude. Changing clothes creates sensory contrast that the nervous system reads as a shift in role. Together, the ritual signals to your body, the day is finished, the office is closed, even if the space is identical. For remote workers in small apartments or houses, habits like this often decide whether stress accumulates without release or gets punctuated with closure. Boundaries don't rebuild themselves, you construct them one repeatable act at a time. And the payoff is subtle but powerful. Nights that feel like nights again, mornings that have clear beginnings, and a nervous system with room to reset instead of carrying static into every corner of life. What this reveals is not just about work. The deeper takeaway is that blurred environments expose how dependent we are on cues and patterns. When routines crumble or roles blend, our nervous system flounders. Reintroducing even the smallest rituals gives back clarity, which raises a larger point. If stress and overwhelm often have less to do with who we are and more to do with the loops we're running on, then the question shifts. Maybe the sense of being broken is really a sign that the patterns we're stuck in are outdated and ready for change. Patterns, why you're not stuck, your habits are. Most of what feels like stuckness comes from one place, patterns running on repeat. Daily life is full of loops that operate beneath awareness. The same thoughts surface every morning, the same actions follow, and the results accumulate until they look like proof that nothing will ever change. That cycle is not a reflection of being broken. It's evidence of how reliably the brain protects old tracks once they're laid down. As habit neuroscience shows, repeated behaviors shift control from goal-directed circuits in the prefrontal cortex to the basal ganglia, the brain's hub for stimulus response habits. At first, you must think through every step of a routine. Over time, as behaviors repeat, the pathway shifts from conscious effort to automatic execution. This is efficient when the habit is useful, like brushing your teeth or learning a new skill. But it works just as efficiently for patterns that drain rather than strengthen. Refreshing email dozens of times, postponing tasks, or grabbing snacks under stress. Once a loop embeds, the brain favors it because it conserves effort. You aren't choosing laziness or sabotage. You're rehearsing an old script your nervous system prefers to save energy. The problem in 2025 isn't that the brain changed, it's that the environment around it did. An occasional inbox check once felt like a professional necessity. Now, with phones and platforms engineered for constant pull, every refresh resembles a slot machine. Sometimes rewarding, sometimes empty, always reinforcing the loop to try again. Social media transformed similarly. What began as casual downtime has been rewritten by design systems that exploit attention. The brain, however, still treats both as simple distractions, unaware each scroll represents a new circuit strengthened. Instead of rest, focus fragments. Instead of control, the loop grows tighter. That mismatch, old wiring repeating in newer, louder contexts, creates the sensation of being trapped. Mel's techniques operate here as pattern interrupters. The 5-second rule isn't simply about motivation, it wedges space between stimulus and automatic reaction. Mid-scroll, the countdown breaks the circuit and hands control back to the prefrontal system. With 5 seconds of pause, space for an intentional choice emerges. High-fiving the mirror works similarly. The morning reflection used to act as a trigger for criticism. A consistent opposing gesture rewrites what that cue initiates, until acknowledgement and support become the automatic response. Neither tool eliminates the initial signal, both overwrite the routine response tied to it. But interruption alone doesn't build permanence. Making a new pattern requires sustained repetition. Short bursts won't outcompete older grooves without consistent replacement. Research on habit formation confirms this. The median time to automaticity is 59 to 66 days, though variation runs longer depending on the behavior. That means a handful of attempts won't hold. A new loop stabilizes only when installed with steady practice linked to clear cues in daily life. The brain rewires by volume, not by declaration. Think of it as updating software. Old applications run on launch not because you want them, but because they're coded into startup. Force quitting works for a moment, but unless you install new code, tomorrow's reboot summons the outdated version again. The only lasting fix is creating an alternative default that launches automatically. By repeating a mirror high five every morning, or by associating a countdown with stepping outside after work, you're coding new scripts. After weeks of consistency, the nervous system favors the new launch instead of the outdated one. People often misread the relapse to old habits as personal evidence of weakness. In reality, the relapse is structural. The rut was deeper than the number of new passes laid down. Brains don't judge quality, they tally quantity. Each repetition adds weight to one pathway or the other. It's like cutting trails into fresh snow. A single walk doesn't set the path, but walk it daily for 60 days, and it becomes the obvious route everyone can follow without thinking. If you find a new habit refusing to stick, troubleshoot with 3 checks. First, Q, did you attach the habit to something stable you already do, like brushing teeth or making coffee? Second, activation energy. Is the starting step small enough to succeed even on hard days? Third, accountability. Did you tell someone else or create a public marker so the loop exists beyond your private willpower? Each of these adjustments comes directly from what neuroscience and organizational research show about habit structure. Cues must be predictable, steps must be friction light, and social anchors strengthen compliance. Many failed attempts can be revived by tweaking one of these 3 conditions. This view reframes stuckness into something observable and adjustable. Rather than assuming a flaw in character, you evaluate whether the automated pattern fits current needs. When it doesn't, you design the replacement system. Feeling stalled is not a verdict. It's a signal that the grooves in operation no longer match the conditions of your life. From that perspective, frustration is less a dead end and more a directive. It guides you to update the loop rather than question your worth. Once seen this way, the evidence of progress shifts. It's no longer about waiting for a sudden transformation, but about noticing the accumulated weight of small interventions. Each countdown that gets you moving adds one more repetition in the new direction. Each mirror high five pairs approval with your reflection until it feels natural. Each round of process-focused visualization mentally rehearses the hard part, making it easier when the cue arrives. Over time, the structure catches. What looked like stuckness reveals itself to be loyalty to patterns, and patterns can be disrupted, redesigned, and replaced. The real relief comes from realizing that what feels immovable is actually flexible with practice. Neuroplasticity guarantees it. Habits are learned scripts, not permanent identities. The system is not rigid, it is programmable. And while effort is always required in the rewiring window, the eventual reward is momentum without constant struggle. That's the point where the new trail eclipses the old one and hard choice becomes automatic step. Recognizing this won't make every reset easy, but it will prevent the spiral of self-criticism that often does more damage than the habit itself. Once you see stuckness as a looping process, you can shift energy away from blame and into small, directed interventions. Even minimal actions begin to add up. The pattern is the problem, not the person. And patterns, by definition, can change. Of course, not every interruption has to be weighty or serious. Some of the most effective resets are light, unexpected, even playful. That opens an entirely different way the brain can switch states, sometimes faster than counting down, often without effort at all. Humor as a cognitive reset. Why do silly memes sometimes calm us faster than a meditation app? because laughter can flip the state of the nervous system in seconds. Humor isn't just entertaining, it's a functional reset. Think back to a moment when you were spiraling in anxious thoughts. Every possibility seemed to confirm disaster, and then a ridiculous video or joke cracked you up. In that instant, you didn't solve your stressor, but the grip of tension loosened. Your system shifted from alarm mode toward calm. That's why humor deserves a place in everyday regulation. It cuts directly into the cycle. You can even test the effect right now. Take the critical inner voice that tells you you're behind or failing. Then imagine that voice squeaking out of a helium balloon. The message is the same, but its weight evaporates. The authority of the critic collapses under the absurdity. What you feel in that moment isn't trivial. In neurobiology terms, you've shifted from sympathetic activation into parasympathetic recovery. The nervous system reads the humor cue as non-threat, and the body finally exhales. Research shows laughter can lower stress hormones like cortisol and activate parasympathetic, rest, responses, so humor triggers a real physiological reset. In controlled studies, blood pressure and heart rate settle, breathing slows and stress chemistry drops after a genuine laugh. These biological shifts explain why people often report feeling lighter after catching a funny clip or inside joke. Unlike interventions demanding long concentration stretches, humor needs only seconds to rewire state. And it's not about pretending problems vanish. That bill or difficult email still requires action. What changes is the version of you that responds. Tight and panicked, you make clumsy choices or avoid the task altogether. Lighter and reset, you spot solutions or at least deal with it without collapse. Humor doesn't distract in the shallow sense. It repositions your nervous system so you have the capacity to handle reality more effectively. Daily life offers constant evidence of this mechanism. A tense meeting eases the moment someone makes a small joke. A long traffic jam shifts when someone in the car calls out how absurd it is, and laughter replaces irritation. In both cases, laughter creates room to breathe. The external condition remains, but the group exits rigidity and regains flexibility. That shift matters because humans adapt best when flexible, not when clenched in stress. You see it online too. Headlines about automation or technology easily fuel worry, yet people share AI memes that exaggerate the situation in playful ways. Joking about an AI writing emails better than you doesn't rewrite global economics, but it does make the fear livable for a moment. The nervous system interprets the joke as safety, interrupting chronic alarm. Breathing space is restored, and with it, enough agency to think clearly. Humor works because it creates contrast. Your body cannot maintain total contraction while laughing. The diaphragm releases, breath deepens, and even facial tension breaks when you smile. Physiologically, it's proof of state change. Stress curls inward, humor opens out. And it doesn't take much. Small, even forced laughter can set off the same cascade. This is why short humor breaks throughout a day act like hygiene for the nervous system, staving off fatigue from non-stop demands. The digital era makes these humor resets more accessible. A meme or quick video between tasks can accomplish in seconds what structured techniques sometimes need minutes to achieve. Workers who scatter light humor into long days often report they reach evening less drained. What looks like wasted time actually functions as regulation. Micro resets that preserve energy across the day. Still, not every kind of humor helps. Note, humor that targets or shames others, or yourself in cruel ways, can raise stress instead of lowering it. Sarcasm that isolates or cynicism that deepens despair tend to amplify tension. The helpful strands are inclusive or self-deprecating in kind ways, or absurdist humor that reframes exaggerated fears. These forms release pressure because they connect and gently pull the situation into perspective rather than tearing anyone down. One of the subtlest strengths of humor is how it reframes identity. Anxiety often tells a story like, "This is who I am, I'm broken." But reframe the thought as, "Here we go again, another new episode of What If Everything Falls Apart starring me," and it shifts instantly. Humor adds distance. Instead of fusing with the identity of being anxious, you see the thought as a passing storyline. That distance matters because it turns permanent-sounding self-doubt into temporary content. Humor also builds resilience in groups. Beyond the physiology of individuals, it creates shared relief. During collective stress, political cycles, market drops, community disruptions, memes and jokes about the shared challenge spread fast. Why? They convert isolation into connection. By laughing together at the same tension, people feel less alone and more equipped. This communal reset strengthens coping because burdens feel smaller when distributed across a community. Framing humor as a structured practice reframes how we use it. Instead of stumbling into occasional laughs, you can choose humor strategically. This might mean intentionally saving a short playlist of videos you know break tension, or practicing mocking your inner critic at the precise moment the spiral begins. You treat humor not as mindless entertainment, but as planned medicine. It's free, it's available instantly, and it yields measurable biological benefits. Reclassifying humor is important. Many dismiss it as avoidance, but that misses the point. Humor is as much a tool as breath work or exercise. It acts through different systems, yet the outcome, reduced cortisol, lowered heart rate, relaxed muscles, is tangible. That makes it one of the fastest and most efficient interventions available without cost or special equipment. When you reframe it as intervention instead of distraction, its value becomes obvious. You can apply this immediately with a simple test. Spend 10 to 20 seconds mocking your own inner critic. Take its harshest line, "You never get anything right," and imagine it delivered by a cartoon character or a silly voice. Notice your body's response in real time. Shoulders loosen, breath comes easier, the loop breaks. That is the micro reset in action. It costs nothing, but it may give you back the capacity to engage again. Humor won't erase anxiety overnight, just as no single technique does. But it offers a portable, rapid reset that keeps the nervous system from locking down. Practiced deliberately, it interrupts spirals, relieves tension, and restores flexibility, exactly the state you need to attempt new steps again. And that sets up a critical reality. Even with tools like humor resets, most people still struggle with keeping habits alive past the excitement of the first few days. The real test isn't starting, it's sustaining. Practical troubleshooting when habits don't stick. When habits feel like they're slipping away, the problem isn't willpower, it's usually a breakdown in design. Many people abandon habits early. The initial enthusiasm burns hot and then fades quickly. Research on habit formation shows that persistence, not motivation, is what separates temporary experiments from routines that last. That means the key question is, why don't I feel motivated anymore? But what went wrong in the system around the habit? The difference between giving up and staying consistent often comes down to knowing how to troubleshoot. Take the mirror high five. On day 1 it feels playful, even fresh. By day 2 or 3 it's slightly awkward, but you try anyway. By the second week, many forget entirely or claim they're too busy. That's not proof the ritual was pointless. It's an example of missing structure. You brush your teeth without thinking, grab your phone, leave the bathroom. The new habit never locked to an existing cue, so it vanished from memory. The issue was logistics, not belief. This small example shows the principle clearly. Most dropped habits are dropped cues. The same tension applies to the 5-second countdown. One day it snaps you out of hesitation. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you move. The next day, half asleep, you think about using it but hit snooze instead. That's because the brain had no environmental support. It was easier in that moment to default to comfort than to summon effort. Even powerful tools can fail when the moment isn't stacked in their favor. Tiredness, distraction, clutter, each acts as resistance in the system. Without a routine designed to reduce that resistance, the habit slides. And there's a bigger modern hurdle: interruptions designed into your devices. Notifications don't just demand attention, they splinter it into fragments. You can begin a countdown to start writing, but half a second later a digital nudge derails the sequence. Once attention breaks, the habit window closes. In effect, technology doesn't simply test your discipline, it structures a battlefield where distraction has all the advantages. Without preparation, the habit loses before it starts. So what helps? Research around habit formation suggests a clear pattern. Motivation is unreliable, but environment is predictable. Troubleshooting means auditing the setup and making deliberate edits until friction lowers. Instead of asking your brain to remember a habit every single time, you embed it in the space you already move through. Instead of demanding heroic willpower, you shrink the energy needed to begin. That shift, environment first, motivation second, is what makes change stick. To make this practical, you can run every struggling habit through a 4-step troubleshooting checklist. First, add a reliable external cue by attaching the habit to something you already do daily. Want to high-five the mirror? Do it right after brushing your teeth with a sticky note reminder if needed. Second, reduce activation energy by shrinking the habit until it's impossible to resist. If exercising feels steep, count down just to putting on shoes, not running miles. Third, build social accountability, even at micro level. Tell a friend or text someone each day you complete the step. It shifts the loop from private to shared. Fourth, remove or manage interruptions. That may mean silencing notifications, putting your phone in another room, or using digital timers to hold focus. Together, these 4 adjustments solve most breakdowns that people mislabel as personal weakness. Think of cues as the infrastructure. If a habit doesn't fire automatically, it's almost always because the cue wasn't visible enough. Humans thrive on predictable triggers: turning off lights before leaving a room, reaching for coffee in the morning. Add cues where the habit should live, and the routine locks into place faster. Sticky notes, visual markers, or physical props transform memory into automatic association. This isn't about forcing focus, it's about planting reminders where the body already operates on autopilot. Lowering activation energy goes next. People imagine the summit and get paralyzed by its height. A habit that starts with a jump feels harder to repeat than one that starts with a step. By shrinking the opening action into something frictionless, open the journal instead of writing 3 pages, roll out the mat instead of completing a workout, you reduce the mental cost of starting. Research confirms that once the first step happens, follow-through becomes more likely because the brain prefers continuing what's been started. The momentum comes from design, not motivation. Accountability then adds a social layer habits often lack in isolation. Historically, rituals were shared. You prayed together, ate together, worked in visible collaboration. That meant consistency wasn't just personal, it was communal. In the modern era, you have to create those ties intentionally. A simple text check-in with a peer, a shared log online, or a low-pressure buddy system can offer enough visibility to keep you on track. Knowing someone else expects your report changes how the brain values the action. You're no longer dealing just with your own drift, but with social reputation, and humans are wired to care about that. Managing interruptions closes the checklist. New habits are fragile, like small seedlings. If storms of distraction hit before roots grow, the habit won't survive. That's why preempting pings and interruptions matters so much. Airplane mode, time blocking, physical separation from devices, these aren't extreme hacks. They're structural shields that give fresh routines the space to implant before distraction wipes them away. The difference between abandoning a practice and stabilizing it often comes down to these preventative edits. Seen this way, failure is a misdiagnosis. Forgetting a ritual for 2 days doesn't mean you lack discipline. It means the cue was weak. Skipping exercise isn't evidence of laziness. It usually means activation energy was too high. Shrinking the step fixes the barrier. Every point of collapse is diagnostic. Instead of concluding, I failed, you ask, where is the snag? Was it missing a reminder, a step that asked too much, a lack of accountability, too many interruptions? This reframing transforms habit collapse into habit repair. Think about how you approach technology when something breaks. If your phone app crashes, you don't throw away the phone. You scan for bugs, reinstall or update the software until it runs again. Habits operate the same way. They fail at the friction points. Smooth those points out and the system runs where it left off. This approach removes the sting of self-blame and replaces it with targeted problem-solving. Troubleshooting habits feels less like self-criticism and more like maintenance. If you examine routines you once dropped, meditation, journaling, workouts, or planning, the real reason rarely comes down to a lack of desire. Almost always, the collapse ties back to one of the 4 issues. No visible cue, too much activation cost, no accountability, or unmanaged interruption. When you apply the checklist, you regain leverage. Instead of trying to summon endless willpower, you adjust the structure until it carries you. Once habits feel like experiments you're refining, instead of verdicts on your identity, they become sustainable. So here's a challenge for today. Pick one habit you've struggled to keep and run it through the 4-step checklist. Add a cue, shrink the first step, build small accountability, or block an interruption. Then test it for real within the next 24 hours. Notice what changes. And if you try it, share the experience in the comments. It turns your experiment into someone else's insight. What this reveals is that habits aren't just systems of action. They're ways of reminding yourself you matter enough to design your environment in your favor. And once you see habits not as verdicts but as scaffolding, a different truth becomes visible. The routines we build are less about achievement and more about how we choose to see ourselves. From stuck to seen, the spiritual angle. What if fulfillment isn't rooted in achievements at all, but in something far simpler, being recognized first by yourself and then by others? From stuck to seen, the spiritual angle begins here. People are taught every day to chase milestones, promotions, awards, or likes. Yet beneath all of that, there's a quieter drive, the need to feel that who we are registers, even in small ways. Many don't realize how much of their restlessness comes not from lacking results, but from feeling unnoticed. In today's connected culture, this gap grows wider. Everyone is visible, profiles, updates, images scatter across feeds, yet visibility is not the same as being seen. Glancing at faces on a screen is not connection. Clicking like is not recognition. That's why someone can scroll for an hour, seemingly surrounded by contact, and still close their phone with an ache of isolation. Recognition requires presence, and presence begins with self-recognition before anything external can add meaning. Being seen begins with rituals like looking in the mirror and offering a gesture of acknowledgement, as simple as a high five. These rituals provide a baseline of internal validation before you ever seek it from outside the room. This is often missed. Invisibility doesn't usually start with others. It begins quietly inside. Consider the daily sequence in most mornings. You catch a glimpse in the mirror but skip past your own eyes while brushing your teeth. You leave without one actual acknowledgement. Then the day fills with obligations, notifications, outward references. It seems natural to attribute invisibility to culture or networks, but the habit of self-skipping is at the root. The nervous system starts to interpret the absence of recognition as evidence of not mattering. That's why these micromoments compound. They aren't shallow mechanics, they're subtle lessons your brain records about your worth. Mel Robbins' rituals address this at a surprisingly deep level. Yes, the 5-second rule moves you past hesitation, but notice the meta-message. The countdown says, "My decision has weight." The high-five habit does the same, a gesture that without needing language affirms presence. It's tempting to underestimate that 2 seconds in front of the mirror as trivial or silly, but at a basic level it is spiritual hygiene. You anchor recognition in your own body before the outside world has a chance to distort it. These rituals don't replace therapy or community, but they create an internal reference point so external validation lands differently. They help build day-to-day resilience, and over time that creates a quiet strength. The reason it works so effectively is that it bypasses intellectual resistance. Affirmations often fail because the words clash with belief. You say, "I love myself," but a counter-voice instantly rejects it. A high five has no counter-argument coded into it. It's universally associated with celebration, encouragement, approval. When you give it to yourself, your nervous system processes encouragement whether your mind agrees or not. It's this embodied action that grounds you. Most spiritual practices are about anchoring presence, breath, posture, ritual. The mirror high five condenses that into a physical cue you've rehearsed for decades in social life. By flipping it inward, you anchor self-recognition in seconds. Humor plays into this in a similar way. Nobody pairs a high five with hostility, it's absurd. That built-in playfulness diffuses resistance. It reminds you that spiritual grounding doesn't have to weigh heavy, that acknowledgement can arrive joyfully. Laughter and rituals both serve as resets. They open space in the nervous system, loosening anxiety or judgment. By training yourself not to ghost your own presence in the mirror, you learn to hold yourself accountable to visibility in the lightest possible way. None of this cancels the complexity of modern life. The online world still tempts you to confuse visibility for recognition. Notifications still create an empty sense of contact. You can still gather dozens of reactions and feel no shift internally. That's why autonomy matters. Rituals return control. You give acknowledgement first, instead of waiting for the temporary nods of others. Every time you high-five your reflection, you're practicing a kind of independence. Your recognition arises from you, not borrowed from likes. Over time, that becomes a spiritual anchor. And it extends outward. Humans crave belonging, and belonging begins with acknowledgement. A workforce, a family, a circle of friends, they thrive when members feel visible, noticed, registered. But when self-recognition is missing, external communities feel hollow. Tension bounces off because there's no foundation for it to stick. The opposite also holds. Once you've acknowledged yourself, outside recognition amplifies instead of evaporates. Rituals like Mel's create that baseline readiness. They don't erase loneliness or remove craving for community, but they prepare you to absorb those connections when they come. Think of the nervous system as a lens. If the lens is fogged by self-erasal, no amount of light from others produces a clear image. You can achieve external signals, promotion, applause, financial wins, and still feel blurred inside. Clearing the lens requires acts of direct acknowledgement. Once recognition exists internally, the light coming from the outside finally registers clearly. That's why external achievement without grounding often lands as hollow. The fog was never touched. By contrast, internal acknowledgement reorders the system. Goals don't repair identity, they express an identity already honored. This isn't the kind of perspective you hear in productivity discussions. Self-help often trims rituals into hacks for output, but the deeper effect is about presence. The 5-second pause or the mirror high five aren't just performance tools, they're spiritual reminders that you exist, you count, you are worth acknowledgement in the ordinary flow of daily life. These practices don't solve everything. They can't replace therapy or supportive relationships. But they restore awareness that your existence is enough to register, and that foundation makes achievements feel like expressions rather than compensation. Here's a simple reflection worth pausing on. When was the last time you acknowledged yourself without proof? If you can't answer quickly, that's a signal. Try the mirror ritual tomorrow and notice what shifts, not in your day's outcome, but in how you carry yourself into it. That's where the spiritual angle joins the practical. Both depend on recognition as scaffolding for resilience. Payoff becomes clearer with practice. When you choose self-acknowledgement, growth stops being a chase for validation. It turns into expansion built on stability. You're not scrambling to prove visibility, you're visible first and action follows more cleanly. It lowers the risk of burnout because the fuel isn't a hollow craving, it's connection already established. That shift ripples through ordinary behaviors. You notice less tension in emails, less bitterness in comparison, more patience with progress. You are registered within yourself, so the outside world feels less like a verdict and more like a canvas. Spiritual grounding, then, doesn't always require retreat or silence. It can live in the most ordinary place: a bathroom mirror, a 2-second pause, a funny gesture. These rituals don't claim to fix identity, but they do provide compass points. Enough daily repetition, and you spend less time searching for proof. You walk into challenges with acknowledgement already in place. And as these practices accumulate, the bigger insight emerges. What feels like being broken is often the signal of outdated wiring repeating invisible loops. Recognition, practiced daily through simple rituals, creates space for update. That's where the deeper transformation begins, not in erasing flaws, but in reorienting how you meet yourself each day. Because when the need to be seen is met first within, the outside world stops defining whether you matter. And that opens onto something more durable, a system better equipped to reset, adapt, and move forward again. Conclusion means stepping back to see the picture clearly. About 40 million adults in the US live with anxiety, roughly the size of California's population, and APA surveys show majorities report stress over current events, technology, and work. You are not broken. What feels like failure is old wiring running in an overstimulating environment. Small rituals, 5-second interruptions, self-acknowledgement in the mirror, process-based rehearsal, even humor, help shift those circuits when repeated. Try one tomorrow morning, whether countdown or a mirror high five, and drop one sentence in the comments about what changed. Small cues change wiring, repetition builds new grooves. Start with one 5-second act tomorrow.